Here, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you and good evening, board members. The first item of business on the organization of the board for 2019 is the selection of a chair for 2019. Would you like to select the chair first, or would you like to have the pledge of the invocation first, Mr. Chairman?
Let's go ahead and do the pledge and invocation.
Absolutely.
If everyone could stand for the Pledge of Allegiance by myself and the invocation by Dr. Trampy. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Father, we thank you for all the blessings of your creation. This evening we pray especially that you bring comfort to the family of our friend and colleague, Troy Tigner. And we pray that you watch over us this evening and guide us as we do the people's work. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Very good. The first item then is the selection of a chair for calendar year 2019. Are there any nominations for chairman of the Board of Supervisors?
For myself, I'll nominate Dr. Trampy as chair. Anybody else have any nominations? All right. Well, Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Dr. Trampy?
Aye.
Chair, aye. Now,
Your meeting, Dr. Trampy.
If we proceed with the appointment of the vice chair, is there a nomination? Mr. Yakubowski?
Yes, sir. I'd like to nominate Mr. Skinner.
Are there any further nominations? If not, we'll close the nominations. Vote on Mr. Skinner as vice chair. Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Benton?
aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Shall we
Here, or we have switched?
rearrange our seating first or adopt the bylaws first? Yeah, let's.
Let me grab that bag right there. Feels better way over here.
This is not going to be a surprise since we already took the picture, but Mr. Benton, if you'll stand. On behalf of the county supervisors and now we can proceed with adoption of the bylaws and code of ethics.
Mr. Chair, we have a brief presentation on some minor changes to the bylaws to present to the board.
May I have the floor computer, please? So this year, there are just a few minor changes that we've noted over the course of the year. The first change that we're proposing the board consider is to strike reference to the second meeting of the month as the work session. There has been raised among our colleagues that might be an issue, not referring to that as a regular meeting. There doesn't seem to be a difference between the way the meetings are conducted. And so we'd suggest for clarity purposes to just refer to both meetings as regular meetings. That involves a few changes to affect that. The first one in section 2.2-1, the second change in section 2-1.1, and then the third in section 4-1B. And with those changes, both meetings would just be referred to as regular meetings of the board. The second change that we propose is just moving the accept clause in section 3-1 regarding chair appointments. We're just moving the clause from one location to another. It doesn't actually change anything, but it will clarify that the following sentence to what it relates, if that makes sense. And the final change is simply a typographical error in the punctuation of section 2.4.1, which should be section 2-4.1. And those are our recommendations for the board.
Are there any comments or motions?
Motion to approve.
Is there any discussion? If not, Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Benton?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
And Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye.
With regard to the Code of Ethics, Mr. Chairman, there are no recommended changes. We have heard no desired changes by the board, so those are presented in the same form for the board's approval. I will have a copy for you all to sign, as is the usual course, and we can take care of that after.
Motion by Mr. Skinner. Mr. Benton?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall? Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
And chair votes aye.
And, Mr. Chairman, I believe we also have for adoption the resolution 2019-1, setting the board's calendar for the year. There was also discussion of the possible addition of an extra meeting for February 5th to be held at the Marshall Center for occasion for public hearings in relation to S-Power. We have an alternate form of the resolution if the board would like to add that meeting, or that meeting can be added later. It's just very simple to do it now and alleviates the necessity of supplemental advertising if it is set as part of the board's schedule for the year.
Mr. Skinner?
I watched the last meeting that was over at the Marshall Center, and somehow it wasn't the voice and the lips moving were out of sync completely. And my concern is that, I had to close my eyes so that I could hear without, it reminded me of Godzilla, with Japanese, make the film, but it's off. So I'm concerned about the people at home listening in on that. Have we checked all the high schools if their auditoriums are available? Is Cortland through that phase to where we could use their auditorium like we do before?
Mr. Chair, just on that,
Mr. McLaughlin?
why are we adding this meeting?
It's felt that the solar proposal will take enough time and we'll have enough speakers that we want to have a meeting just for that.
So I disagree with adding the meeting. I say we stay with the regular scheduled meetings, and if we do need to add a meeting in the future, we can make that decision at that point. But I just don't feel like disrupting the organization. As Mr. Skinner points out, we don't necessarily have the same communication capabilities in all those locations. So I'm not going to support it, but I just want to point that out, that I think we should not add the meeting at this
Mr.
time.
Chair, I'll add to that too. When I looked at that meeting, there weren't that many speakers at that time. I think the one meeting that we're going to have in a lot of time is the first time that our S-Power is presented to us as a board. And we're going to go to public comment after it's present, and I think that's going to take up the majority of the time. I think the space is fine here. Unless we're not legally allowed to use this, we have more than, I think it's right around 200 people allowed in this room. What? 195? Okay. I would, because we already have telecommunications and everything set up here, that it works pretty well. I was just disappointed in, when you have to close your eyes to actually concentrate on what's going on, it's not right. So I agree with Mr. McLaughlin. Let us figure that out once we have our meetings.
Mr. Benton?
Yeah, I would like to have a separate meeting. This is going to take a good portion of the night. The one you're talking about, Mr. Skinner, was the second one for C and B and C sites. The big one that was already had was the A site. This place was jam-packed, uncomfortable, and along with sending people over to the Marshall Center, then having to bus them back over here to come and speak. We had some handicapped folks that were a little annoyed that they were having some difficulty as far as shuffling around and figuring out where to park and everything like that. And I am positive our first one is going to probably be just as many people, if not more. And I would like to go ahead and have a suitable place to do the meeting instead of having a cluster like that one with the Planning Commission. We've pretty much decided, well, I may be speaking out of turn, but I think we have pretty much decided to keep the Marshall Center and use it. Well, we might as well use it. It has a huge auditorium. I think some of the issues that you're speaking of can be addressed between now and then. And I don't see why we shouldn't move it and accommodate the mass instead of a bunch of shuffling around, signs out, and everything else.
Well, Mr. Chair, if I could, please.
Mr. Skinner?
Thank you. It's not that it's, if you look at the facility itself, it's a smaller stage than we could. I do not have a problem moving it from here to like Cortland or to Riverbend. Somebody has an auditorium that's up for us, and we can properly broadcast from there and do it. My problem, and I got calls by other planning board members when they had to go to the restroom, they had to walk all the way up the hill. I call it the hill, but in the auditorium, the way it is. I wouldn't mind moving it, but I just don't think for us, it's a small stage. You don't get to see everybody, couldn't hear people speaking. So, and I know we do well at the budget hearing we hold. So have we looked into, and I think people have asked, is any school available for that evening that we need to make it?
I don't believe we have answers back on that ask that I know of, unless Amy might have some. The only suggested alternate location in the dialogue that I'm aware of was the Marshall Center that was suggested by one or two supervisors. So we have not checked dates, but on this information, it may be advisable simply to adopt the calendar as it is without the additional meeting, and we'll check dates and availability for the schools.
So this February 5th meeting was in addition?
Yes, sir.
Okay, why don't we just make it where we make it, but make it the first meeting, regular meeting that we should have, as Mr. McLaughlin says. So we meet on what, February, what would be the 12th?
12th.
The 12th. So keep it the 12th, but look for a different location, is what I would recommend. And I don't really recommend the Marshall Center at this time.
That was in the form of a motion?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
The technical issues that we had at the Marshall Center, Jane, could you explain and see if it's something we can be fixed or if it is fixed?
Yes, the technical issues, I've just heard about them now, Mr. Skinner, that there were issues with the recording of the meeting. Was it during the live meeting itself or just during the recorded part of the meeting?
It was the live section.
The live section. That's a technical issue that can actually happen in any facility, whether it be the schools, whether it be here, and that's a technical adjustment that we can make if we know that that's occurring. So we will monitor a little bit more closely for that next time and make sure that does not occur, so that can be remedied.
Jane, does it bother you if we move it to another place? I mean, for you to set up, it really isn't any different than from the Marshall Center or Cortland or Riverbend?
The cost is the same regardless of where we set up. The connectivity is the same. It'll be an internet connection regardless of where we are. We work through the schools. If we go to the school, Marshall Center, we can do the Marshall Center, but we can correct the technical issues that we had regardless of where we hold the location or hold the meeting.
My real issue is just the size of the stage. I looked at it and I saw people, it was more like a U on that and everything, and sometimes I couldn't even hear some of the planning commissioners talking, especially when they took votes. So,
Yeah, Mr. Chair, and one last thing. I don't think the planning commission hasn't even voted on this yet, so why are we scheduling our first meeting?
I think
For
what
that point,
we're
so-
finding out is the very first
Not
meeting
ready.
we hit
Right.
S-Power, we're going to have an evening of a lot of people talking.
So your motion is to approve the current schedule without this additional meeting?
That is my motion, and we can decide on where if they want to.
Mr. Yakubowski?
Just a quick question from staff. What kind of deadline are we looking if we needed to add a separate meeting? What type of lead time would we need for something like that? Because I am in favor of a separate day to do this meeting, just simply because of the amount of people that are going to show up for it and the amount of attention that it's going to get. And I do agree that it should be a different location than the Marshall Center. I heard from multiple people that it didn't work very well, and even into the parking where you have to park across the street. I would like to hold it somewhere else if that's feasible, but also find out what lead time that we do need to, set the meeting date, if it's going to be a different date than a date that we're going to have on our calendar.
I believe there would be two different lead time issues, Mr. Yakubowski. One would be advertising of the public hearing, which is once a week for 2 successive weeks through the planning department, and then the calling of a special meeting, which is approximately a week of lead time to give notice and post notice of the meeting.
So would we have enough time if we went to our second meeting in January and decided to hold a special meeting for this at that point? I don't have a calendar in front of me, and my apologies. That would be the 22nd, which would be, it would be 2 weeks before the 5th, exactly. So if that falls within it, then I'll support it, and then at the meeting on the 22nd, we can decide whether or not we want to hold a separate special meeting for this application. As long as you guys say it's okay with 2 weeks lead time, I'm fine with that.
The other question is, do we know when the planning commission's going to have their decision? Have we heard from the, I know planning commission has not approved it yet.
Mr. Batten? Mr. Skinner, I think that's on the next meeting. That's my understanding of it.
Mr. Chair.
Good afternoon, board members. The Planning Commission has their next meeting scheduled the 16th of January. They have discussed conditions, and staff in the County Attorney's Office are working on crafting those conditions that the Planning Commission desires. So I expect that the Planning Commission will vote the cases on the 16th. The lead time, if the Board of Supervisors changes the meeting location or sets a special meeting for the 5th of February on the January 22nd meeting, that's going to be very tight in terms of getting the ad to the paper. For them to be able to run the ad, it would need to run Thursday. We could potentially coordinate with the paper to have it waiting, and then and potentially run with a delayed or postponed if the board doesn't take that action. I know that's not ideal, but it's just getting the ad to the Freelance Star in time to get it to run 2 days after the board takes their action on the 22nd is kind of tight.
Exactly. Mr. Chair, just
Mr. McLaughlin?
I thought kind of the question was as well, is there enough time if we hold the regular meeting on the 12th to set a special meeting
Yes.
afterwards before we have to request an extension from the developer, which
Yeah.
we could do?
Yes, there is
So there is
time
time.
for that, yes.
Okay, so we can-
It's
yeah.
just the February 5th, if there was a special meeting that day, that would be tight if the board didn't take action today.
Mr. Yakubowski?
Yes, sorry, and so I can muddy the waters just a little bit more. We could always just have the February 5th meeting approve it and then cancel it if we decide to cancel it. I mean, I think that the reason that we want to have it on the schedule is just so that we don't get into a situation where we're up against a March 30th deadline and we're having to add meetings at that point. because anticipating that the Planning Commission votes one way or the other on the 16th, it's going to be in our hands, and at that point, we basically have until the end of March to do whatever we do with it. So the quicker it could come before us, any changes or any back and forth that needs to happen, it gives us more time. So I wouldn't be against holding the meeting on the 5th, and if we decide to cancel it, we always could.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Marshall.
Ms. Parrish, the Planning Commission, they're going to vote on all 3 applications on the 16th, correct?
That's my understanding.
That's clarification.
That is where we're headed.
And if our board, we hold a public hearing, can we hold the public hearing and have a hearing for all 3 applications the same night? Because they broke them down for the Planning Commission.
You certainly can. You know, whether or not time will allow for it depends on, you know, if everybody who gets up and speaks at the first one desires to get up and speak at the second 2. It sometimes is the case that, you know, those who have gotten up and spoken at the first one, the comments are generally the same for the other 2 special use permit applications, but, you know, they are still allowed their right to speak. So it certainly could be accomplished in one meeting, but it is possible that that meeting may have to be continued and the public hearing carried over.
Mr. Skin.
The other comment would be, whenever we hold this first meeting, then the agenda would be limited just to S-Power, if we could do that. I don't think there's anything that is that can't wait for 2 weeks. And Mr. Taylor, you could sort of fill us in. I don't think there's anything in the future I can see right now, so that we come on the 12th, but that's the only agenda item is S-Power. Do you have a comment on that?
First of all, the board controls the agenda for its meeting, so if that's the only thing you want on that agenda, then that's the only thing on that agenda.
Do you see anything in the future that's going to be that difficult that we can't push it back 2 weeks?
Yes, we also have the budget presentation on the 12th.
Is there any further discussion?
So what's Mr. Chair?
The motion on the floor is to adopt the calendar as currently presented without the extra meeting.
Sure.
Mr. Benton.
I'd make a supplement motion that we add the extra meeting solely for the S-Power SUPs for the February 5th date.
So it's a substitute motion that you're making to have the additional meeting on February 5th, and is that at the Marshall Center as well?
Yeah, as long as they can fix the issues with the recording and all, you know, and I mean their stage isn't much bigger than this, so I'm sure we can arrange to have our seating done differently.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that it was the 5th at the Marshall Center.
Is there further comment? Mr. Jakubowski.
I would just prefer to have a location determined at a later point when the schools are contacted to see if we can have a different high school, mainly because of the parking and the just the building and the comments I heard from planning commissioners and others about the difficulty in hearing and other things that had arisen. So I would support having a meeting on the 5th, but having the location determined at a later time.
Mr. Benton.
I'll take back the Marshall Center and then to be determined location. How about that?
Is there any issue with deciding the location outside of our formal meeting, just as available?
The only difference with that is if you set the February 5th as a regular meeting, which is being contemplated, and the location, obviously it has to be somewhere. You have to set it somewhere. If you start it here, that's fine. But to actually change the location, we have to make sure that you all adopt the resolution and that gets advertised in the paper. So it's just making sure that if you do that on January 22nd, that we have enough time in the paper to get it in there. It's the same issue to get it advertised, get that resolution advertised of that location change within enough time for February 5th. So it's a little tight.
But if we do pass Mr. Benton's motion, then as Ms. Parrish said, she can arrange with the paper in advance that we're probably going to be advertising this, and then we'll formally vote on it at our next meeting.
We'll absolutely do all we can to prepare for that. It's just, with the paper, I can't guarantee anything, but, we'll certainly do all we can to prepare for the location change so we can have the resolution changing the location of that February 5th meeting. But again, just when you do vote, set wherever you got to set it somewhere, whether it's here or the Marshall Center. And if it changes from that, we'll do the resolution as we would for the location change of any other regular meeting. We'll prepare for it. Like I said, I can't necessarily guarantee it, but we'll prepare for it as much as possible.
So the motion is the substitute motion. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Benton.
Aye.
Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
Mr. Yakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
No.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye.
Okay. At what time was that?
4:30. We better start early.
Yeah. Just to confirm, there wasn't a stated time, but if we could get another quick roll call vote to set that time at 4:30, please.
A motion for 4:30.
Mr. Benton.
Aye.
Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
Mr. Yakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
No.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye.
That should complete the organizational matters, Mr. Chairman, and bring us to approval of the agenda. We did have one additional item suggested for the agenda, and that was the addition of a closed meeting inserted following board reports. With that addition, we'd ask for your approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Skinner. Mr. Yakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Mr. Bennett.
Aye.
Benton. Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye.
Next, we have an award presentation, Mr. Chairman, with the state champion Chancellor High School field hockey team.
And on behalf of the board, I'd like to congratulate you on your state championship. It's a tremendous accomplishment. We already had the photo, so I guess we can proceed to approving the motion.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Skinner.
If you could, when we took that picture, I don't think we were on TV. And maybe if we could just have the ladies come up and the coaches come up so they're recognized on TV, because state championship is very special. So if that's okay.
Yes.
Would you read the rest? Yeah, would you like to? I can read it if you want.
Yes. Yeah. You gonna read it?
Where is it?
I've got.
All right.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'll go ahead and read the resolution for the Chancellor Girls Field Hockey Team. The 2018 Virginia High School League Class 4 State Girls Field Hockey Champions. Whereas the Chancellor High School Field Hockey Team completed an outstanding season by winning the 2018 Virginia High School League Class 4 State Girls Field Hockey Championship. And whereas the Chancellor High School Chargers varsity field hockey team is comprised of 22 players, 2 managers, and 4 coaches. And whereas the Chargers defeated Leesburg Heritage High School in the state quarterfinals 4-2, and Midlothian High School in the state semifinals 3-0 to advance to the state finals. And whereas the Chargers defeated Culpeper's Eastern View High School 2-1 at South County High School in Lorton, Virginia, November 10th, 2018, to win the state championship title. And whereas the Chargers finished the season with a 16-6 record, bringing home the 6th state field hockey championship title in Chancellor High School's history. And now, therefore, be it resolved that the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors commends and recognizes all 22 players, 2 managers, and 3 coaches, and expresses its pride and appreciation for their excellence and achievement. Congratulations. Woo-hoo.
job, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations again.
Mr. Chair, do we
We expect.
We have not voted on that.
motion to approve that resolution?
I'd like to have one more.
Yeah.
We have a motion to approve the resolution. Mr. Benton.
Aye.
Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
Mr. Yakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye.
Next item is your consent agenda. Tonight's consent agenda is as follows. Item 1 is to approve board meeting minutes for December 11, 2018. Item 2 is the approval of a contract modification for the renewal of Commonwealth Irrigation and Landscape for grounds maintenance services. It's the third annual renewal of 4. Item 4 is to approve a contract modification for renewal to Computer Cabling and Telephone Services, Inc. and Plexus Installation, Inc. for fiber optic cable installations. This is the final annual renewal of 4. Fourth is the approval of a contract modification for renewal to Draper Aiden Associates to provide professional engineering services for solid waste services. This is the first annual renewal of 4. Item 5 is to approve a purchase order contract to Train US Incorporated for Holbert Building HVAC equipment replacement at a low bid price of $392,365. Item 6 is to approve a budget amendment and appropriation for additional overtime expenditures for Building Safety Office. It's $25,000. Item 7 is to approve a budget amendment and appropriation for insurance reimbursement for a Parks and Recreation vehicle in the amount of $22,580. Item 8 are capital projects budget amendments as detailed in your agenda. And item 9 is Rappahannock Area Health District carryover request for the Health Department to retain $54,900.16 in end-of-year funds from FY 2018 that they wish to use to purchase office equipment and to update their office space here in the Holbert building, and that is your consent agenda.
And we have well, do any of the supervisors want to pull anything from the consent agenda?
Mr. Chairman, I think we usually do the public comment first, then request approval.
This public comment period is specific to the consent agenda. There will be a more general comment period shortly, and public hearings begin at 6:30, but this is time for public comment solely on the consent agenda items. Do we have anyone signed up?
No, sir.
Is there anyone who did not sign up who wishes to comment on the consent agenda? Seeing none, we'll close this public comment period.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve the consent agenda. Mr. Yakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Mr. Benton.
Aye.
Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye.
This brings us to the general public presentation period. Amy, do we have folks signed up for that?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, shall I run through the rules for public presentation?
Yes.
They are as follows. Public presentations are an opportunity for citizens to present matters you believe deserve the board's attention. These presentations are not part of a public hearing. Sign up to public hearings are each separate. Public presentations are one-way comments from you to the Board of Supervisors. This is not a forum for public dialogue or debate. To make a public presentation, please sign up on the provided sign-up sheet and please print clearly. Please come to the lectern when your name is called. Clearly state your name and your voting district for our record. Address your comments directly to the board. State whether you're speaking on your own behalf, in which case you'll have 3 minutes to speak, or on behalf of a group, in which case you'll have 5 minutes to speak. Public presentations shall not be used to address matters subject to public hearings or to make political campaign speeches, private advertisements, or personal attacks. Your written comments are always welcomed by the Board of Supervisors. We do have a light system. Green means go, yellow means you have 30 seconds to sum up, And when the light turns red, you're to stop and the microphone will be deactivated. Who's our first speaker, Amy?
Judy Janelle, followed by Tony Taramina.
Okay, I'm Judith Janelle, Livingston District. I want to address noise-induced health effects. This relates to the S-Power site. The SUP should be denied because of the magnitude of detrimental health effects from the noise from pile drivers and other construction noise during construction at the solar site. The decibel levels and duration of the noise cannot be mitigated to a level which will cause no physical and mental harm. This is vastly different from a normal construction site. Consistent and/or increased decibel levels of noise causes a variety of detrimental health effects, to include hearing impairment and deafness, tinnitus, stress, inability to fall asleep, and inability to go into a deep restorative sleep, hypertension, vasoconstriction, which is cardiovascular issues, heart attacks, increased incidence of atrial fibrillation with impulse sounds such as jackhammers and pile drivers, changes in the immune system, leaving people more vulnerable to catching colds, viruses, flu, and other infections, endocrine disorders with an increase in incidence of diabetes, low-term births and low birth weight babies, annoyance, frustration, and anger, problems in school and work with a poorer ability to organize thoughts, concentrate, and perform tasks, especially when a person has no control over the noise. There's an increase in effects of post-traumatic stress disorder with a loud noise known to be a trigger for a flashback. The exposure to loud noise causes changes in your ability to hear. The amount of damage depends on the amount of noise and the length of time you were exposed to it. The EPA calculated that the public should not be exposed to noise levels louder than 70 decibels over 24 hours. The occupational safety standards state that workers exposed to 85 decibels and over need hearing protection. This is a weighted requirement which includes duration of time exposed to the noise. This requirement will not protect everyone since some people are more sensitive to noise than others. The Federal Highway Administration states that trees do not block highway noise. In order to effectively reduce traffic noise, trees would have to be planted closely together to block any visual path between the highway and a residence or other building. And the group of planted trees would have to be at least 100 feet thick or wide. That's a quote from the Federal Highway Administration. Since highway noise is not as loud as a solar site construction noise, the Highway Administration facts should be used. The Highway Administration also states that sound generally drops 6 decibels for 200 feet. This leaves the folks at the perimeter of the solar site well above the EPA's recommended 70 decibels. Children can have hearing damage at 80 decibels. Children can have chronic hearing damage with speech implications at 90 decibels, and children can only be exposed to 100 decibel noise.
Ma'am, I'm sorry, but your time has expired.
Tony Taramina.
I thank the board for letting me address them. My name is Tony Taramina. I was asked to speak about the potential dangers if a fire erupted in the solar field. And I'm doing so because of my experience. I'm a former New York City fire officer. I fought fires in all types of buildings in New York City, from private homes to tenements to projects to the World Trade Center. But I can honestly tell you I've never fought a fire in a solar field because we didn't have any. What I can tell you is that there is a potential severe danger with these solar panels. I'll give you a quick story, and not that I like fire stories, but I can tell you how it could go bad in a hurry. I was a young Bronx firefighter detailed to another borough for a day, and I never did a brush fire. It was down by Kennedy Airport, and I was allowed a company man, and I was working separate from an engine company, so they had a line putting the fire out, and I had what they call an Indian tank put on my back, and I was using it to put out small pockets of fire. Well, I thought it was fine. The fire was moving towards the water, and I was good. Next thing I know, the fire the wind changed and the fire's coming at me, and I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I couldn't breathe because the fire was absorbing all the oxygen, and I thought, here I am fighting these fires in the Bronx, and I'm going to wind up dead in a brush fire. So my concern is to my brother and sister firefighters and police officers and sheriff's deputies that are coming into a situation like this because, pardon the expression from this Yankee, but things can go south in a hurry. And I'll tell you why. It says any electrical installation is exposed to risks of arcs, but solar installations are particularly sensitive to the exposure because of the continuous DC current and high currents and voltages, 300 to 1,000 volts involved. DC arcs do not self-extinguish and can reach temperatures as high as 3,000 degrees Celsius and 5,400 degrees Fahrenheit. Arcs at this temperature can melt metal, which can fall as slag and ignite nearby combustible materials. You put firefighters in this situation, first of all, there's an electrical field all around them. You can't shut the power down. They are susceptible to electrical shock. Using fog lines won't help. I'm sure the chief has a strategic plan for doing this, but I can tell you as a professional, it's a dangerous situation. And
Sir, I'm sorry, but your time has expired, sir. Thank you.
There are no other citizens signed up to speak.
Is there anyone who did not sign up who wishes to address the board at this time?
Hi, my name is Kimberly Wyman. I live in Levels Crossing Subdivision, Chancellor District. I want to address the board this time, just take a moment and talk about the government shutdown. I know as members of the Board of Supervisors, you have no control over the federal government, but as citizens of the state of Virginia, you do. I'd like to implore each of you to call your congressman, call the senators, call the representatives who many of you campaigned with and knew on your campaigns. Call them and ask them to end this shutdown. We have a lot of people in Spotsylvania who are being put out of work, who are not going to be able to pay their rent. We've done shutdowns before. We know they're detrimental to our community. People stop going out, people stop spending money, and a shutdown eventually hurts all of us. Again, I know as a board you can't do anything, but as individual citizens who represent Virginia, who represent Spotsylvania County, you can. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Chairman and other members of the Board of Supervisors, my name is Charlie Payne with the law firm Hirschler. I appreciate your time this afternoon. First, congratulations to Mr. Trampy and Mr. Skinner on your elections as chair and vice chair. It's well deserved. I also want to make a comment about Troy Tigner. My deepest sorrow and greatest sympathy to his family, to this county, to the staff members who work closely with Troy. I worked very closely with Troy for 12 years. He will be deeply missed. He was one of the best people I knew, and great institution in this county, and we're all going to miss him very much. I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you. If you could also mention your voting district.
My voting district is in the city of Fredericksburg, Mr. Chairman. I also want you to know, as the representative of S-Power, I know that many of these hearings whereby this case is not before the board, you have been subjected to information being provided by concerned citizens, much of which we respect and appreciate. I want you to know that we have worked very hard to address all of those issues. There are 142 conditions being proposed by staff. It may be a state record, if not a world record, for an SUP. Certainly it is a big project. Certainly it requires that kind of attention and detail, but I want you to know that S-Power has been committed to work very hard with the county, with the community, to address those issues, and will continue to do so. I am not here to talk about the negative, to reflect upon what those comments are. I will make the comment that my law school professor used to always say, you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. I ask respectfully that you follow the facts, you follow the science. We have clearly presented that information in regards to the comments from the community. Our experts have provided that information. The county's own consultants have confirmed that information. So I won't get into those details. I will stay positive. This is a wonderful economic development opportunity for Spotsylvania County. It will change the economic environment for the future. It will attract businesses and new industries to this county. It will generate positive tax revenues for the county. In the first 2 years alone, it's a $110 million output, first 2 years. I impress upon you to please review and follow this type of investment and what it could mean for the future of Spotsylvania County. I also encourage you to speak to the mayor of Lancaster, California. Similar size jurisdiction outside a metropolitan area. S-Power has been there for the past 7 years. It's got 12 projects and 600 megawatts. They have new industry. They have economic development opportunities. They got vastly new jobs. It's a real opportunity. Thank you very much for your time, and have a great evening.
Is there anybody else who did not sign up who wishes to speak at this time? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment period.
Brings us to board reports, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Marshall?
Mr. Chairman, we adopted the agenda to have the closed session meeting before board reports.
Was it before or
Following
after?
board reports.
I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
Sorry.
Mr. Benton, do you have a board report?
Yes, just a couple things. In regards to the Marshall Center, I'm hoping we can, if we're going to keep this building and use it, I would like for us to start looking into fixing up the auditorium, replacing the seats, and really getting up to modern standards. Like I said, maybe I've heard this tossed around a little bit as far as using the Marshall Center for our meetings, letting the this boardroom could be used for offices. It's some redone and used for offices. As far as my opinion, I would support that. But I think we really need, if we're going to keep the Marshall Center, we need to use it. Just sitting there and letting it sit and waste away is not doing any good. We either need to make a decision or start getting it fixed up slowly but surely. Next, I know we had 2 presentations from the YMCA and Germanna Community College for nice chunks of money over periods of time. And I think before Mr. Taylor puts this into his budget, we need to make a decision on those and get the information that I'd requested from at least the YMCA as far as their program usages. I mean, are we going to start when any kind of gym, Planet Fitness, American Family Fitness, when they offer a program on Parkinson's or some other adult, program, are we going to start giving them money to build racquetball courts and other facilities on their campuses? I mean, I don't think it's the government's responsibility to be building and spending our money on these things. And as far as Germanna, that's all in Orange County that they want to build this nursing program. And I'm all for the education and all, but again, is it our responsibility to build these campuses? I don't think it is. I think it is well beyond what we're supposed to be doing as a government entity. We can't even keep up with our roads, and here we are wanting to spend whatever it is, $250,000 for 5 years or up. I can't remember the exact prices that they wanted, but that's kind of. I think we really need to have some discussion on this before it's put into the budget and just checkmarked as we go through this process. And Mr. Taylor, if you could please check with the YMCA as far as that data that I'd requested, the usage and stuff like that, before we go making a decision on spending this kind of money on racquetball courts and stuff like that. I think it's beyond the government's responsibility. And
Sure.
The YMCA does great things, but again, it's not the government's responsibility to pay for these facilities. That's it.
Mr. Marshall?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to start my board report by first, the Lake Anna Business Partnerships have sent a letter. It was sent to myself. I think Mr. Benton got a copy. I sent it through email for everyone else could also receive it. I'd like to read it into the record. We had an algae bloom in Lake Anna. A lot of the business owners are concerned about it. The business owners that rely on the water to make a living on the lake with the rentals and different things were affected by this. It starts out, dear supervisors, we, the board of the Lake Anna Business Partnership, representing over 90 area businesses and business owners, urge you to examine the 2018 harmful algae bloom advisories posted by the Virginia Department of Health, as well as last spring's E. coli advisories, and take steps necessary to identify the causes, formulate a reasonable plan to avoid reoccurrence, and better notify lake residents and visitors. Our members are acutely aware of the actual and potential effect health advisories have on their lake-related businesses. We look to you to set the standard on determining the causes and ways to overcome them so the economic engine that is stoking a portion of the county's revenue continues to operate vigorously. This is a serious matter to us. Lake Anna is a valuable resource for hundreds of families and businesses. What's good for the lake is good for business. We call upon you to take immediate steps to address these concerns and invite you to share them with us at your earliest convenience. I'd like to get county staff, if we could, after reading this letter, if we could go ahead and work with the health department to be able to put out a better notification to these businesses and to the people that visit the lake. People come from all over the state. We have people from out of state that come to Lake Anna State Park, and if we could notify them and let them know the potential problems that we have had to try to alleviate them would be wonderful. But if we can work hand in hand with the health department to try to put a stop to this. Also, with my board report, I meant to send this in earlier, but I would like to make a motion to reappoint Sean Hockaday to represent the Berkeley District on the Transportation Committee and have a vote on that.
If there's no discussion, Mr. Jakubowski?
Yes.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Benton?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Mr. Skinner, your board report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to ask the question, is where are we at in getting a voting system rather than individual voting? Can you tell us where we're at in getting something, and what are we looking at, please?
If memory serves me, Mr. Skinner, Jane had been tasked to begin to identify any further alternatives, but then there was also discussion at the board to continue with voice voting and to suspend the search. Jane, do you have any different recollection on that?
Actually, we had a consent agenda item come before the board to move forward with the replacement of an electronic voting system. We are struggling trying to find a system that is not, that will serve its purpose but not be overwhelmingly expensive, and buy part of a system that we'll never use just to get the electronic voting on it. So we continue our search, and that's pretty much the status of it right now.
What is the, when you say expensive, what do you find out there, and what's it going to cost us to get a system?
Well, typically you have to buy an entire board package system to get the voting system along with it, and they can be anywhere between $40,000 to $60,000, which is just not serviceable. We don't have that budget for it right now. I have a $5,000 budget. We do have a solution. I've not recommended it. It is a solution. It's a homegrown solution provided by one of our vendors. But I feel even that is overpriced, and that's about $2,000 to $3,000 for us to put that into place. And it's basically a remote control that will show a vote on a screen. I don't have a good solution at this point, Mr. Skinner, is what I'm basically trying to convey. We've not been able to find a good happy medium in the middle. The last system we had, we actually purchased from Hong Kong. We had trouble finding that system as well, too, and they're no longer made.
Well, I don't know what this board thinks, but we need to consider whatever it costs us to get a voting system up here in our terms and everything. We're supposed to set the standard for the region and stuff of that nature, and yet I watch other board members and their dealings, and they've got electronic voting machines, and I think it's worth it for us to do that. Okay. I really do.
I'll put forth some recommendations.
I'd like you to look through and give us some recommendations. What it costs, it costs. I mean, it's a one-time purchase, hopefully.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The other thing I'd like to say too is when we talk about the YMCA, a lot of the money that we give to the YMCA goes to people who can't afford to go to the YMCA and pay the dues or the whatever it costs them to use the YMCA. And there's no other health program out here that's going to let you go in free and do that. And it is for our children, it is for our residents, and so I think if you take a look at the history of the YMCA, what they've added and how they produce, and I think Mr. Ross will know even better because I believe you're on the board, Mr. Ross, or Mr. Yakubowski. So I would very seriously, what money we give the YMCA, I think is truly worth it. And also, the Germanna, okay, well, more than 50% of the students that go to Germanna are from Spotsylvania. And that doesn't mean that's going to be out at the Locust Grove campus. We've got a wonderful campus over here off of Route 17. Got a lot of things. Nursing program works with Mary Washington Hospital, so it really is something, and it helps our kids. I mean, most of these children cannot go to a 4-year school because of the cost. So the first 2 years are reasonable because they go to the community colleges. And I think we should support education, obviously, whenever we can. And what money we do give them, we support them for a lot of projects that they've made, some here on the Fredericksburg campus, and some, this one looks like it's going to be at the Locust Grove. And there's a lot of other counties that are helping Germanna out there too. So it's just not us alone. So I think we want to look into it, that's fine. But let's get the exact information as far as how many students come from Spotsylvania. And I believe the majority of them do come. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's the last thing I have.
Mr. Yakubowski.
Yes, thank you. First of all, congratulations to yourself and Mr. Skinner for your election. I think that that's the first unanimous election we've had for chair and vice chair in a while. So it just means that we're all hoping that you both run very well-run meetings and timely, quick. And so if that means cutting me off, I think that might be appropriate, yeah. I had just had a couple of things. One of the things, since the budget is coming up, I would like to see and request that the budget items that didn't make the county administrator's cut would be set alongside in a separate document so that we can see what else is out there that wasn't able to be included in the recommended budget. The other thing that I would like to see, and this is more of a long-term strategy, is more of a connection from our budget and the dollars we spend to the outcomes that we expect. Since at the local level we're basically a service provider, we don't set a lot of policy, nor do we really have a lot to do with dictating what happens. We basically have to provide a huge majority of our budget is pass-through dollars. And so if we truly are going to set the standard for Virginia counties as our strategic plan calls for, I think that what we need to do is begin the process or enhance the process if we currently have a system that has short, mid, and long-term goals that we not only are striving for, but we also show our citizens what we're attempting to do. Simply not pouring money into a department because we want to, but there's a reason for it, and then there's a strategic outcome that we're looking for. And I think that if we were to undertake a program such as that, I think that a lot of the money that is spent, the taxpayer dollars that are spent, can be shown to be worthwhile, or perhaps something that we shouldn't be doing, and therefore we can cut it and redirect those dollars somewhere else. Now, I know that that's a very long term. I'm not looking for that at the next meeting, but that's just a discussion that I would like to have over the next year or so. Thank you.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Nothing to report.
Mr. Ross.
Nothing to report.
For my board report, I have several dates to read off and events. January 11th, which is Friday, is Human Trafficking Awareness Day. Citizens are encouraged to wear blue to raise awareness. January 21st at Hospitality House, which is at 2801 Plank Road. There will be an event on human trafficking, a meet and greet at 9:30 a.m., a panel discussion from 10 to 11:30 a.m., followed by a luncheon. The first two parts of the event are free. There is a cost to the luncheon, but feel free just to come to the free part if you prefer. January 25th, a theater group from Mary Washington, the Rude Mechanicals, will be putting on an original play to raise awareness about human trafficking, Between the Cracks. The play is at 7 p.m. at Lee Hall, room 411 on the Mary Washington campus. On a personal note, my term expires at the end of this year, and I just wanted to let everyone know I will be seeking another term on this board. And that is the end of board reports. Mr. Taylor.
Excellent. That brings us to that closed session.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, this will be a resolution to adjourn into closed meeting. Whereas the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors desires to adjourn into closed meeting for a discussion, consideration, or interviews of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of specific public officers, appointees, or employees of the county. Specifically, the county administrator, the position of zoning administrator, the position of stormwater management program administrator, and the position of erosion and settlement control program administrator. And whereas Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors desires to adjourn the closed meeting for discussion concerning a prospective business or industry or the expansion of an existing business or industry where no previous announcement has been made of the businesses or industry's interest in locating or expanding its facilities in the community, specifically a technology business. And whereas the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors desires to adjourn into closed meeting for consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by a public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel, specifically the claim submitted by Brian and Jean DeVoter for the Board of Supervisors' consideration. And whereas pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2, 3711A1, 5, and 8, such discussions may occur in closed meeting. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors does hereby authorize discussion of the aforestated matters.
So moved.
Mr. Benton?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. And we do have two closed meetings on our agenda this evening. We expect this one will be the shorter one if the audience will bear with us. Microsoft has decided to shut down my computer, so if you could go over what is next.
Could we have the county attorney read us back into open session, please?
Do you want that?
This is your resolution to return to open meeting. Whereas the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. And whereas Section 2.2, 3712D of the Code of Virginia requires a certifications by this board that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors hereby returns to open meeting and certifies by roll call vote that to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from the open meeting requirements of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act and identified in the motion to convene into closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed meeting.
So moved.
Mr. Yakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Mr. Benton.
Aye.
Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are two follow-up items from the closed session. One would be for the board to entertain a motion to appoint Mr. Richard Street as the Stormwater Management Program Administrator and as the Erosion and Sediment Control Program Administrator for Spotsylvania County.
So moved.
Without discussion, Mr. Benton.
Aye.
Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
Mr. Jakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye.
Second action would be for the Board of Supervisors to entertain a motion to appoint Ms. Kimberly Pomato as interim zoning administrator.
So moved.
Motion for Mr. Benton. Mr. Jakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Mr. Benton.
Aye.
Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye.
Mr. Chairman, if I understood correctly, your desire is to move to the one public hearing that we have advertised for the evening, given the lateness of the hour?
Yes.
And that is the public hearing for the lease of office space for Congressman Abigail Spanbarger. And this is, as the board will recall, there is a congressional office space that has been provided here in the Holbert Building up around the corner from administration for the last several years. Congresswoman Spanbarger requested a lease for that space to continue having such an office with us. And that lease requires a public hearing. That is before you this evening. It has been advertised in accordance with law, and we simply need to open that public hearing for any public comment.
Okay, we'll open the public hearing. Is there anyone signed up?
Yes, sir. Judy Lawrence, followed by Kim Wyman.
Hi, my name is Judy Lawrence, and I live in Salem District. And when I heard that there was a vote, I didn't realize it was a requirement. I just came to say that I hope you will agree to give Ms. Spanbarger the room to rent because you did it for Dave Bratt. And I would hate for this Board of Supervisors to look like they're anti-woman. That's all I have to say.
Kim Wyman, followed by Felicia Miller.
Hi, I'm Kim Wyman. I am requesting that the board votes yes to lease the space to Abigail Spanbarger the same way they did for Dave Bratt. I also did not realize it was a required vote, but I hope that most of you will vote yes because you do have to show the same, regardless of party, the same, regardless of party, you have to show balance. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Felicia Miller, followed by Jesse Waleski.
Hello, Board of Supervisors. My name is Felicia Miller. I live in the Chancellor District, and as a constituent of Abigail, I think that we need Congresswoman to come to our community so that we can voice our opinions, especially being that Spotsylvania is on the move.
Jessica Walensky, followed by Mo Petway. Jesse.
Hello, I'm Jesse Walensky. I am in the Cortland District. I believe that Abigail Spanbarger should have an office space in the office space available by the county. It would show a level of bipartisanship on the Board of Supervisors. Thank you.
Mo Petway.
Good evening. My name is Mo Petway. I live in the Battlefield District. I'm here to offer my support to ask you to allow Abigail Spanbarger to have an office in the building. I mean, the benefits just cannot be thought how we have an opportunity to contact everyone, to contact our congressman. I mean, issues, right at hand. It'd be great to have that if the issue come up like the issue today, we would be able to talk to her, give her our opinion or a recommendation on what we want them to do. So whether anyone, I think if we have an opportunity to give someone, no matter who it is, to be close to Spotsylvania County, I think we ought to take advantage of that. So I definitely fully support you allowing Abigail Spanberger space in our building. Thank you.
There are no other citizens signed up to speak.
Is there anybody who did not sign up who wishes to speak at this time?
I'm Dick Toy. I'm from the Cortland District, and I'm here on behalf of the Spotsylvania County Democratic Committee. And I just want to urge the board to approve space for Abigail Spanberger. Thank you very much.
Is there anybody else who wishes to speak?
Here she comes.
Hello, board members. My name is Christine Lynch, and I live in the Battlefield District. And I support your approval of Abigail Spanberg's lease. And I would like to ask everyone here who supports this to please stand. Thank you.
Is there anybody else who wishes to speak in this public hearing? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing.
Chairman, motion to approve.
Is there any discussion from the board? Seeing none, Mr. Benton.
Aye.
Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
Mr. Yakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That takes us back up to presentations and reports by staff. First among those is the vote on the claim submitted by Brian and Jean DeVoter for the Board of Supervisors consideration.
Mr. Chair, I motion to continue this the claim submitted by Brian and Jean DeVoter to our next meeting 2 weeks from now.
Is there any discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Yakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Mr. Benton.
Aye.
Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next is the vote on SUP.
Do we still need public presentations?
I apologize, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we do. Was there anyone signed up for second presentations?
Is there anyone who did not sign up who wishes to speak on any issue? Seeing none, we'll close the public presentation time.
Thank you. Next is the vote on SUP 18-0007. This is B Farms Development LLC, Franklin's Crossing ALF in the Lee Hill District.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Give me just 1 second to get this monitor working again. For the record, Patrick White, Planning Department. With any luck, maybe this will work. Okay, it just powered off. Okay, I think it's going to work, Jane. Perfect. Thank you. I apologize for that delay. For the record, Patrick White, Planning Department. This case is SUP 18-7. It is a special use application for the Franklin's Crossing. It's in the Lee Hill voting district. The applicant's requesting a special use permit to allow a 125-bed, 3-story assisted living facility in an R2 or residential 2 zoning district on a property that is approximately 10 acres in size, identified as tax map 25-A-14C. The property is at the end of a road called River Meadows Way, which is approximately 0.6 miles northeast of the intersection of Tidewater Trail and River Meadows Way. Staff's recommending a denial. The Planning Commission recommended approval. Please note that one of the things we'll talk about tonight is an alternative access that the Planning Commission has not seen. On October 9th, 2018, the Board of Supervisors closed public hearing, continued the subject case to the next scheduled meeting, which was October 23rd, to provide time for the applicant to communicate with the community. A meeting was held with residents of River Meadows on October 17th. On October 23rd, the applicant requested that the case be continued until January 8th, 2019. To further that dialogue, and another smaller kind of community meeting was held with the neighborhood of River Meadows. A revised GDP was submitted by the applicant on December 17th, 2018, pursuing this special use application. During the second community meeting, a townhouse proposal was discussed by the applicant but was not committed to. So just a brief recap. The property itself is highlighted in red. It's hemmed in between three different neighborhoods. The River Meadows neighborhood is to the southeast, Tidewater Village is to the northwest, and River Heights is to the southwest. The applicant had originally proposed to access the site via the yellow path, which was through River Meadows Way, and now proposes to access the site via the green path, which is through River Heights. The River Heights neighborhood is a mobile home park where the River Meadows neighborhood had approximately 140 homes in it. It had a lot more driveways that were fronting on the access path. That situation is not the same on the current proposed path, where instead of driveways, people in that neighborhood use parallel parking to park on the side of the street. The subject property and all of the surrounding properties have a mixed-use future land use designation, with the exception of one, which is a small slice of open space immediately to the southeast. The subject property and all surrounding properties are zoned R2. The GDP depicts a 3-story, 125-bed, approximately 57,000 square foot assisted living facility, a transitional screen 2 to the southwest and the southeast, a 6-foot vinyl fence proposed to the southeast to screen mobile homes, a sidewalk connection to River Meadows. There is no sidewalk connection to the southeast to River Heights. And there would also be a cul-de-sac with a gate on the east side of the property. The applicant has proposed to build a structure similar to that pictured here. It's a 30-year architectural shingles, standing seam metal roof, brick veneer, vinyl windows, vinyl siding. Gutters and downspouts, which would be white in color. When staff originally reviewed this case, we found that there were no critical concerns except for standards 4, 6, and 7. Basically, an estimated 239 calls for emergency services are expected from the proposal, about 20 a month. Those dispatch calls would likely come from Fire Station 5 with an estimated response time of about 8 minutes. They must travel about just under a mile round trip through River Heights Mobile Home Park to reach the site. That neighborhood does contain approximately 190 mobile homes or households. Increased speeds of responders will introduce safety concerns related to these vehicles, possibly conflicting with the existing established neighborhood or vehicles traveling within. There are a number of findings in favor. The proposal would provide additional housing for aging residents. The facility would generate jobs and improve the county's non-residential tax base. The facility is partially interconnected via sidewalks pursuant to mixed-use future land use goals. Staff also notes over 50% of the site would remain open, providing green space for the residents and the retention of mature trees. Staff found that the proposal did not meet 3 of the 8 criteria necessary to recommend approval of an SUP. Facilities such as this generate regular ambulance trips, which would have no regular route to the facility than through the River Heights neighborhood. Although the applicant has proposed to reroute all the traffic, and by all the traffic I mean deliveries, emergencies, employees, and guests through the mobile home park, staff finds that this shifts the negative impacts of this case from one neighborhood to another. Based on staff's analysis and the findings noted within your staff report and presented here, staff continues to recommend denial. Should the board find that the application meets the 8 standards of review, staff has provided a number of recommended conditions. There are 3 new conditions. Firstly, that the landowner or operator shall develop an emergency management and communications plan with county FRIM prior to certificate of occupancy. Secondly, that the landowner shall have a trained emergency medical physician on site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Thirdly, that the facility shall not provide memory care services. I'll note that we removed one recommended condition from the last time you saw this, which was no longer pertinent due to the reduced impacts on the River Meadows neighborhood. That access is now labeled on the GDP to be used for emergencies only. Therefore, the regular vehicle trips that were previously proposed to go through that neighborhood will not impact that neighborhood. Therefore, staff's withdrawing their recommended condition 10, which required that the applicant perform traffic calming study and fund any potential improvements necessary along River Meadows Way. The applicant has requested a revision to staff's recommended conditions. Presently, condition 10 states that the landowner operator shall have a trained emergency medical physician on site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The applicant has revised or proposed to revise that condition as the landowner operator shall have emergency trained and licensed medical staff on site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Notwithstanding the foregoing, any nurse's assistant with less than 2 years emergency medical training shall not be included as emergency trained and licensed medical staff. And the plaintiff staff would like to point out that our previous condition, the previous condition to require an emergency medical physician was intended to significantly reduce the amount of emergency incidents at that facility. The applicant's proposed condition softens that. Staff does continue to recommend denial of this case. We'll stand by for your questions, and the applicant is present.
Questions from the board?
Yes.
Mr. Benton.
Were any of the individual residents in the park area, mobile home park, were they notified of this?
No, sir, they are not notified as they are not landowners. The primary landowner was notified. He has submitted documentation supporting the applicant's request, which is before you, it's in your packet in front of you. But as they are not landowners, they did not receive notification of this request.
And just to clarify, they didn't receive the mailed notification, but the signs were still posted in conformance to all the requirements. Obviously, the advertisement was published in the newspaper, but I think what Patrick's referring to is the mailed requirement.
That's what I was asking.
That's correct. Specifically, the mail, they don't get a mailing.
And what? Because they're not technically landowners.
That's right.
And what's going to keep people from using the other route?
There would be a gate there, and that gate would only be accessible by emergency responders.
A gate to the facility?
To the facility.
Okay. So the emergency responders will come up the other path?
I would defer that to our fire chief, but I would imagine they would use either
the most
one of
direct
those
route?
paths.
All right. Yeah, my personal opinion, this needs to be sent back to planning and notices sent to those residents there instead of just the landowner. You got a lot of people, you're just shifting from one location in economic, I'm trying to say this nicely, maybe.
Impacts.
Yes, there are impacts.
If that is your desire, I imagine it is possible to find a way to provide mailed notice to those people.
Okay. Guess that's all I have right now. Go ahead.
Yeah, additional notice can, of course, be provided, but all the legal requirements have been met. Those legal requirements do require mail notice to the property owners. In this case, obviously, it being a corporate property owner rather than individuals.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that yes, it's legally done, but was it the right way to be done when you have a 190 trailer sitting there with the same kind of impacts the other community was going to have, but that community came out and now they've just shifted to another community that maybe is less
informed.
Yes.
That's certainly within the board's discretion. Absolutely. I just wanted to clarify.
So I think that's it. Mr. Marshall.
Just one comment on your page, I believe it was page 7, your information with the fire and rescue that would be responding. Company 5 is on Route 3. It's nowhere near this project. You'd be Company 11, Company 4, Company 6 would be your 1, 2, and 3 that would be coming there. Yes.
Thank you for the clarification. 11 would be the closest?
Yes. Should be 11, 4, then 6.
I apologize. I will note the staff report does say Fire and Rescue Station 11 is located approximately 5 miles from the property. So we'll correct that in any revision.
Mr. Benton.
One more, Patrick. I thought during the regular SUP, they did say a physician would be on site 24/7.
I recall that as well. They have since asked for this revision to that condition.
Yeah, I know how that works. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Anyone wish to comment or make a motion?
Do we have to let the applicant reply or not?
Yeah, we've already done the public hearing.
Then, since it's my district, I'll make a motion to approve SUP 18-0007. I will tell you that we've worked with the communities there, and I think this is the best. We're keeping people out of one community, and we do have like I said, we do have the authority or from the owner of the land to go ahead and do this. And I think we've talked very closely with the fire chief out there. The applicant has worked with him, and we feel very positive that very little traffic or emergency will go down through River Meadows, because that's only in case the other entrance is blocked. So my motion is to approve.
And just to clarify Mr. Skinner's motion, this is to approve the proposed resolution in front of you with the conditions that were placed in your packet, and that's not with the condition that was requested by the applicant.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. We so to clarify that we're talking about vice of a physician. We're looking at a medical person. Okay, and there's a lot of logic to that too. They're going to be qualified, meaning the lowest thing would probably be a registered nurse, an RN, or even a doctor's assistant.
I believe that's a deviation from the condition, sir. I mean, the applicants our original condition was an emergency physician. The applicant's modified condition has reduced that. So it's safe to say, unless you're using staff's condition, that person would be a lesser qualified person than an emergency physician.
Well, I don't think we need a physician there.
Very good, sir.
Okay.
So, Mr. Skinner, your proposed motion would be to move that the board adopt with the resolution and the recommended conditions with the change to number 10 as proposed by.
That is correct. Thank you.
Understood.
Is there any further discussion?
As, Mr. Chairman, as the motion has been made, Mr. Skinner, does that hold the applicant to the memo that we received of with the maintenance on the current road? Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
One other clarification, that the change was to, is condition number 12, not 10, 12.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion, Mr. Jakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Chair votes no. Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
And Mr. Benton?
Nay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White. Chairman, that brings us to the presentation of the FY 2018 audit results.
Picture that up front.
I like it. I want to
Do you know any of that?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. As Mark has just noted, we're here tonight. I am Mary Sorrell, the finance director. I have with me LaShawn Gaines, the chief financial officer of the schools, Becky Forey, the county's controller, and Rob, who is Rob Churchman, who is with the auditing firm of Cherry Beckert. And we are here to present the fiscal year 18 audit results. I think you'll find that it's good news, and so without further ado, I will let Rob make the presentation. Thank you. For computer, please.
I can control it from here?
Yes, you can.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for having me tonight.
I know you got a very busy meeting and lots of going on after this because you had already had the short closed meeting. I'll make my remarks relatively quick because, as you recall from, I see a lot of familiar faces from previous years, we have standard communications that are required each year by an auditor to an auditee, regardless of how complex they are, big, small, international, local, and so forth. And these standards are for corporate and also for governmental entities. And I wanted to go through those required communications for you right now. They are all positive, but let's see, tab or down. There we go, sorry. You're gonna say, as I go through this, Rob, I know this, you've said this to us in the past, you're telling us very obvious items. These items are required to be discussed each time with each board or each council or whoever the governance committee is, regardless of whether or not they are old or new. They presume that you weren't present either in prior years or in earlier discussions. So I do have to positively affirm these items each year. You know that you hired me and my firm to audit your financial statements. We're required to do that audit in accordance with several different types of standards. The federal standards, which we call the uniform guidance, which in the old days used to be called single audit, generally accepted auditing standards, and also generally accepted government auditing standards. And then finally, at the very bottom there, the state specifications. The state has specifications they require of every city, county, and town across Virginia. And they're in areas like looking at budget matters, looking at cash, Virginia retirement system, census data, and so forth. And those requirements haven't changed from prior year. We started our audit work interim in the May-June timeframe, looking at the systems, updating our understanding of the processes and so forth, coming back in the September timeframe to start as the general ledger has been closed and looking at reconciliations and so forth. And we're here today, obviously, with the CAFR for 2018. My procedures also are required by the Commonwealth. There are some procedures that relate to the Sheriff's Office, some procedures that relate to that very first bullet there. The comparative cost report is where the county is required to, in essence, download their general ledger into a standard state general ledger presentation, and then the state takes that submission and allows you to compare yourself to other counties, other cities, and however you want to do that. So we're required to do some minor procedures over those. Also, you have some minor procedures, although very important, over your landfill. DEQ requires some certifications from the county, and we're required to give some very brief agreed upon procedures on those certifications. And then also, finally, I say finally because we're hoping the state will eventually get rid of this step because it's proven to be effective over the years. But basically, we're required to look at the census data you submit to the Virginia retirement system. That's so the actuary can have comfort that the data being submitted about credible comp, gender, retirement, and so forth is valid so that they can do their actuarial calculations each year and give you your estimates of your liabilities related to that retirement system. Finally, in the other procedures, but not any less important than the others, we do have some matters when the federal work is done that we'll have to submit certain things up to a federal website, sort of like the state's transmittal forms I talked about earlier. We'll be doing that. And then also we review the county's debt covenant compliance and give a letter on whether or not we've noted anything that makes us think that there are any kind of any negative factors going into the debt covenant calculation. All those procedures have not changed from prior year. Now, the most important slide you're interested in, slide 5. Our opinion on the very thick document you have, 172 pages numbered, but there's also more pages than there because some of them are Roman numeral numbered and so forth, is that the financial statements or clean opinion are unmodified in our accounting lingo. That means that we found that the statements present fairly in all material respects the accounts and transactions of the county in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. We did have one finding on schools' capital assets, and we use the term significant deficiency. That's an accounting term. It basically means it wasn't trivial, but it wasn't material. But we're required to make you aware that there was an adjustment that the schools we would have liked to have had made in the financials, but it's not material, so it doesn't impact the overall financial statements. It had to do with the recordation of some school bus transactions. With regards to our federal work, that work is currently still in progress. It's not required to be completed and submitted to the feds by end of March, but we will be done much earlier than that. To date, we have no findings to report on that, but again, our work is still in process. And just to give you an idea of the programs that we're looking at this year, that the feds do give some requirements as to how programs are tested each year, and they also give some ability of the auditor to rotate some programs based on maybe risk factors may change from year over year. We're looking at, obviously, as you can see there, 2 school programs and 2 social service programs. With regards to our Virginia compliance results, we had 1 very minor finding in the sheriff's office, had to do with the timeliness of the deposits. We had no findings on our VRS census data. In other areas of, as mentioned earlier, the specifications from the state, other areas in those specifications we had no findings, but again, our work is still in progress. And we did mention some IT best practice matters with the IT department. Again, these are best practice suggestions. These are not deficiencies of any way. But as we also know that you are in the midst, knee deep, or some higher than knee deep, chin deep, in the new system implementation. We had some suggestions on things to make sure you consider policy-wise and so forth as you put in your new system. Those are my required communications on the actual specifics of the actual audit. The next couple of slides have a couple of communications that are required each time because they want to make sure those charged with governance understand if there have been activities during the year that they should know as governance committee. One of them is accounting policies. We're required to let you know if we know of any significant changes in accounting policies. We know of no significant changes that are internal. They were externally required. You had to report for the first time on the face of your financial statements your actuarially determined liability related to your other post-employment benefits. You may recall back in 2015, you had to do the same thing for pensions. And now, 3 years later, the GASB, which is the standard setting entity, required that other post-employment benefits also be put onto your, we call it statement of net position, but you think of it as a balance sheet from your way. Also required to make you aware that unless you run the most simplest lemonade stand in the world, you're going to have some kind of estimate in your financial statements because you can't have every number be hard, solid numbers. You have estimates in your financial statements are very common as listed there. They are the same type of estimates you've had in the prior years. And we look at those estimates to make sure they make sense from a comparability perspective from year over year because we want to make sure that entities are not making dramatic changes to their estimates because that can impact, obviously, the current year operations. We also look to see if they make sense compared to your peers. If you had an investment rate of return of X on your pension investments and everybody else is getting Y, then we would question as to why are you out of the norm, for lack of a better term. We found that all your estimates appear reasonable, comparable, and consistent with prior year. We're required to make you aware if we had any adjustments proposed that were of anything other than a trivial nature to update the general ledger on either side. We had no adjustments proposed in the county, and as I mentioned earlier, we had one, again, no one stress, immaterial adjustment. It related to the timing of capitalization of buses from 1 year to the other. That was not recorded in the financial statements, and we found that was reasonable, and we thought that did not in any way distort the overall fair presentation of the financial statements. The next 2 items, you say, I remember those from last year, Rob, because they sound pretty ominous and pretty damaging. Well, no, I'm required to make you aware if I ever had any disagreements with management over audit procedures, reporting and so forth. I had no disagreements, but I can't just ignore and not say anything about it. I have to positively tell you each year whether or not I had any disagreements. The same thing with significant difficulties in getting data or getting time or getting explanations and so forth from any member of school or county staff. We had no significant difficulties in performing the audit. Consultation with other accountants. I've never had this happen in my government arena. It does happen in corporate world because I do have colleagues who've had it. Basically, if I ever was made aware that management here was trying to get a better decision from another accounting firm in order how to account for something, and therefore they may have that auditor do their work, I'd have to make you aware that I knew that happening. Some people call it in the corporate area shopping around for the opinion you want. Again, it did not happen here. But again, the standards require, because these are corporate standards and government standards, that I tell you that it did not occur to any of my knowledge. I received one very critical piece of information that is, you may think is unique from an overall audit perspective, but it's not in the audit arena. It's called the Management Representation Letter. And the standards require that management, because this whole document you have in front of you only has 3 pages of Cherry Beckert letterhead in it. And the other 180 plus pages are your financial statements. And management is required under the auditing standards to represent to me that, and also represent other key matters to the extent that they provided me all information about any legal matters, that the control system that they have in place are their controls, and they're functioning to the best of their knowledge, and so forth. And I've been made aware of all information I would need to be able to give a fair opinion on the financial statements. That letter, if I ever had a client where the client wanted to change those relatively standard boilerplate representations, That would give me, as an auditor, pause. Why would they not want to tell me this? Why would they not want to represent this to me? That did not happen here. But again, under the standards, I have the policy to let you know, affirm to you that did not happen. And I did receive that letter as a condition of my issuance of my opinion. And then last item that's required, and it's always at the end, and I don't know why, because it's important. If this didn't happen, I couldn't be even sitting here. I'm required to positively affirm to you that we are not aware of any transaction, relationship, personnel matter, anything from my firm or any member of my team that would cause me not to be independent of the county. We don't get any service from the county. We don't procure with the county, except from our audit contract, obviously. But if I had a relationship issue or an independence issue, I wouldn't be able to give you my opinion under the audit standards. I will tell you it has happened in the past. Just this recent year, I had a colleague of mine, his wife took a job at a school system. And we were their auditor, so we had to take him off the engagement. Just standard operating procedure. He came to me and said, Rob, my wife is taking a job with the client. I said, okay, Donald, we'll move you off the engagement and we'll put another manager on the engagement. So it does happen, but it did not happen here to any of our knowledge. And those are my required communications. I left this one slide in. I also went on the slide deck with management to so forth. It's really in case you ever get bored and you just want to find something. You want to practice your Googling, and you want to Google asset retirement obligations. Just let you know, there's some changes coming down the pike. Really, the first one there is not going to impact you. It's really really odd circumstance that would impact a government. The one in 2020 for fiduciary activities is going to change some of your presentations and terminology in your financials. And then the last one with leases, it's going to change basically the way you present leases, and it's probably, for more likely than not, going to bring more lease transactions onto your books. But it should not impact your quote-unquote fund balance determination, because it's really what's going to do is put on your books an asset and a corresponding liability to better, in GASB's mind, to better reflect your relationships that you have in the leasing transaction. So, and that's not until 2021. But again, I just put that out there so you know that there are some changes coming. And if you have any questions on those or anything else I've discussed, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Right, Mr. Ross.
So I know, speaking of the OPEB and the financial requirements to list those, and I've talked with LaShawn before about this. I know the schools have made great strides in starting that account, but I think in our budget meetings, we've been briefed that the actual obligation is around $20 million a year for the school system. I know that the county's putting money towards our OPEB requirements. Is that a concern in your audit or something that you looked at? Because I'm not sure how that GASB requirement to list those and how we're doing on the schools is.
Regardless of whether or not you have a formal trust arrangement like the county, the schools have set up, or whether or not you don't have a formal trust agreement, if you still have a plan, if you still have a benefits in place, and you're calculating that liability the same way, the same way, but however, without having a trust in place, you are getting less benefit from a investment return, and therefore, for example, you could be at 3% where LaShawn's at 7%.
Sure. And
that can reduce obviously your overall liability over the years.
So, is there any concern in the audit that we're not putting enough money in? Because even though I know we're getting 7%, it sounds like, which is a good rate of return on the money we have in that trust, is there any concern that it's just not enough per year? From an auditing perspective?
I wouldn't say from an auditing perspective a concern, no, because I can't tell you how to operationally run your entity. I can tell you that there is probably a greater percentage of entities that do have a more formal trust set up than others, but that doesn't mean you have to have one. GASB specifically said there's no requirement to have a formal trust. If you don't have a trust, though, your calculations are slightly different, again, with the investment rate return and so forth.
Well, thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions from the board? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Oh, you want that, right? Or are you going to?
That brings us to, are we finished?
No,
Did?
we did it all.
Brings us to informational matters in my report, Mr. Chairman. A brief CIP update. The animal shelter expansion and renovation project, the pre-construction meeting has been held with the contractor. It included representatives from the sheriff's office. The contractor anticipates mobilization this month to begin prep for site work. The Hunting Run Phase 2 Park improvements are currently out for bid with a scheduled bid opening of January 24th of this month. Improvements include bathroom facilities, picnic facilities, parking and road improvements, a second fishing pier, asphalt access paths, and boat launch improvements. The Judicial Center expansion, the bid opening for this project is on track to occur January 31st. Staff anticipates a construction contract coming to the board in April or May of 2019. The Company 6 renovation and expansion, 6 proposals were received for design services and are currently under review by staff. It should be noted that no local design firms submitted proposals for this work. A recommendation should come before the board in late February or March of 2019. The demolition of the former sheriff's office is awaiting disconnection of power by Dominion before the next phases of demolition can proceed. And the Lick Run Museum, work continues at the museum storage area and preparations are being made for moving the collection and the museum to Lick Run in the spring of 2019, and that is capital projects.
Are we up to new business?
We are up to new business, Mr. Chairman.
I wanted to go over committee and commission appointments. I will catch staff up since this is going to be verbal. Most of these are reappointments, except where I've discussed with board members. There are 4 committees or councils which are direct chairman appointments. The Capital Construction Committee, myself and Mr. Ross as primary, Mr. Skinner as alternate. The Extension Leadership Council, Mr. Benton as primary, Mr. Marshall as alternate. The Finance Committee, myself and Mr. Ross as primary, Mr. McLaughlin as alternate. The Minority Affairs Committee, Mr. Marshall and Mr. Skinner. The rest are board appointments. I would suggest that I nominate them all at once and we vote on all at once. The Ag Forestal District Review Committee, Mr. Benton. The Community Policy and Management Team, Mr. Skinner. On FAMPO, Mr. Ross, Mr. Marshall, and Mr. McLaughlin as primary, Mr. Yakubowski as alternate. On the Fredericksburg Regional Alliance, Mr. Yakubowski as primary, Mr. McLaughlin and Mr. Ross as alternates. The George Washington Regional Commission, Mr. Ross and Mr. McLaughlin as primary, Mr. Yakubowski and myself as alternates. The Joint Fleet Maintenance, Mr. Skinner. The Lake Anna Advisory Committee, Mr. Marshall as primary, Mr. Yakubowski as alternate. PRTC we already did last month. Public Safety Commission Committee, Mr. Marshall and Mr. Benton. The Rappahannock YMCA Board of Directors, Mr. Yakubowski. The Rappahannock Area Youth Services and Group Home Commission, Mr. Skinner. The Rappahannock River Basin Commission, Mr. Marshall primary, Mr. Benton and Mr. Ross as alternate. The Transportation Committee, Mr. McLaughlin, Mr. Benton, and Mr. Skinner as primary, myself and Mr. Yakubowski as alternate, with Lisa Phelps as the school board representative on the Transportation Committee, and the VRE Operations Board we already did. So with that, I make a motion that the board approve these appointments.
Mr. Chairman, the Military
Marshall.
Affairs Committee, is a committee that I serve on that Mr. Cole is the alternate to.
Okay, they didn't make my list, but
Yeah, the MAC Committee. I'd be more than willing to continue to do it. I just didn't know if we could add that to it.
It's our understanding that that's actually a 3-year term and that Mr. Marshall was appointed for a period of 3 years, so there wouldn't have been a need to reappoint. That's why it isn't on the list.
Oh, I got you. Appreciate it.
If there's no further discussion, Mr. Benton?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. That's all I had.
I just have one more thing before the board adjourns. A couple things. First, I've placed the copy of the Code of Ethics there up on the table. If you would, please sign that before you head out. Second thing was, I just wanted to clarify this because this is obviously important. In setting the additional meeting on February 5th, I was 90% sure that I clarified the motion. Mr. Benton's motion, the substitute motion, was to be February 5th at 4:30 at the Marshall Center, with the understanding that that could possibly change. That's the way the resolution reads. So to the extent that anybody understood anything differently, that it would be left here. My understanding is this is the Marshall Center. No other action is necessary as long as you understand that to be the case. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I don't think that's the way it was presented at the end. The final thing was to be determined, not with the Marshall Center as an alternate, to be determined after we got.
Okay, well then, what I would suggest is that we do have a clarification of where that is. And again, my recommendation is you have to set it somewhere, not just as a to be determined place. So again, I would recommend that you set it here, you set it at the Marshall Center, but it be somewhere, and then you can change it. You can't put it in determined. So that would be my recommendation. Let's go ahead, if you wouldn't mind, please, and vote to clarify again the date, February 5th. I understand 4:30, but please, if you would, please clarify the location, please.
Mr. Benton, it was your motion. Where would you prefer we designate?
I believe we had said the Marshall Center, but that was subject to change. But we have that
motion is to set at the Marshall Center with the understanding that it can change. So,
yes.
You'd like a vote on? Okay. Mr. Benton?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
No.
Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Thank you for indulging me. I appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, just one last thing on that is that staff will get back to us within 2 weeks whether there's other locations available.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
If nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.